The other day, I discovered my son sitting up at the counter, drinking a glass of milk. This was a rare scene for our son. I looked over with confusion. He definitely wasn't enjoying the glass of milk, and never has, which is why this was so strange. But pushing through the disgust, he chugged along. When he was done with his last sip, he looked over at me and he said, "Hey Dad, did you know that milk makes you taller?" He had told me that he was drinking milk so he could grow taller like his best friend. The same friend who actually told him that if he wanted to be as tall as him, he needed to drink more milk. Well, unfortunately, my son didn't get any taller that day, but his stomach sure was upset. And it makes me think about kind of the bigger picture of this. You see, in today's world, information is at our fingertips. We've become so accustomed and addicted to AI summaries and instant answers that they can ultimately lead us astray. I can personally relate to this concept. Following a recent toe procedure, I was sent home with post-op instructions and a care kit from my doctor. However, instead of following the doctor's instructions, I relied more on the advice of two friends and a quick Google search to challenge whether or not that the intense instructions that I was given were even necessary. Well, that led to a toe infection and pushed me back even more in my recovery. You see, this is a lot like how sin takes root in our hearts, or the corrupting, spreading influence of legalism, hypocrisy, and worldly unbelief has on our spiritual life. How about you? Can you identify ways in which you've been influenced away from the truth? Maybe the ways that you find yourself with your own spiritual blindness, deafness, or a hardened heart? In today's first reading from the book of James, James warns against the spread and the source of sin, but he begins by illustrating the life cycle, beginning with temptation, when each person is lured by their desire, how desire conceives and brings forth sin, and when sin reaches maturity, it gives birth to death. For my son, the desire to be taller was his, to be more like his best friend. For me, it was my desire to skip the healing process altogether and return to my everyday activities, void of all the hoops and ladders that I was given. As we approach the Lenten season, this is a great opportunity for us to reflect on the temptations that we face that ultimately lead us to sin, but also an even greater opportunity to stop pointing fingers about these desires. Do you find yourself believing the lie that you're being tempted by God? As James points out, God is not subject to temptation to evil, and he himself tempts no one. Not only does James warn against sin, but also against the deception that comes with who God is. You see, God is the one who willed our life, that we may be a kind of first fruits of his creatures. It's God from whom all gifts come. And when we look at today's gospel, Jesus warns against the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. You see, that is the false doctrines, hypocrisy, and the corrupting attitudes of the religious and political leaders of their time that had a widespread influence on the people. We find the disciples in a boat, not long after Jesus had just fed the 5,000 with just 5 loaves of bread. The disciples realized that they had forgotten to bring bread and only had 1 loaf with them in the boat, which, if they had taken some notes, is a lot more than they needed. So Jesus uses this as an opportunity to warn them against the leaven of the Pharisees and Herod. But they conclude that he gives them this parable because they had no bread, totally misinterpreting the point that Jesus was trying to make. Where they had felt Jesus was complaining about their lack of food, they had ultimately forgotten the previous miracles and the abundant provision. This leads us to the question, how often do we fail to remember Christ and his power? Each time we turn to our desires and fall into sin, we choose to turn to our own self-seeking, faithless, and legalistic mindset of the world, relying instead on Jesus' power and provision. Today's gospel ends with 3 important questions to meditate on as we approach this Lenten season. The first question, are your hearts hardened? Where have we built a callus on our hearts that makes it easier for us to turn to our desires and ultimately sin? Where can we invite Jesus to soften our hearts and help us through the temptations? The second question, do you have eyes and not see, ears and not hear? You see, this begs the question of where do we experience confusion about our faith, or even choose to ignore the truth we've already received? And the third and final question is this: do you not remember? When was the last time you took a step back, paused, and reflected on all the ways that the Lord has provided for you and your family, especially when you were at your weakest? What if each morning of Lent, you took a quiet moment and you revisited these three questions? Just as Jesus enjoined the disciples on the boat in today's gospel, he appeals to us today through these readings, and he invites us to grow closer to him over these next 40 days of Lent.